So in this presentation, we're going to talk about contract programming. I've been a contract programmer all my life. I had 2 3-year stints where I did contract programming full-time, and I've done it part-time while I had full-time jobs. So I have a lot of experience in contract programming, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So why would you want to consider being a contract programmer? What's the attraction? Well, why would anyone forego a normal job with security and benefits? Isn't that what you guys are trying to do as computer scientists? In the most part, the answer is yes. A full-time job with benefits and security is really nice. Although in the security part of it, I had a lot of corporate jobs that weren't too secure. There was a time when companies were bought and sold fairly frequently. Every couple of years, you'd be in a successful company, and someone would come by and acquire it. So that security part, unless you're working for Lockheed or Northrop or whoever, that's pretty secure. But a lot of companies actually get bought and sold. So the second bullet point here is important. Can you do contract programming while having a job? Well, that's a multifaceted answer. Some full-time jobs will not allow you to do any contract programming. It's explicitly forbidden that you do any kind of outside software development work. Other jobs are fine with it as long as it doesn't interfere with what you're doing, as long as you don't use any company resources or there's no detraction. Is a life of contract programming for users who can't find a job? So are the contract programmers the losers who couldn't get a job? And that's a really good question, and I would say in some cases it is. In some cases, people are doing contract programming because they can't find a full-time job. But I would also say that contract programming can be for the really ambitious software engineers who want to do more than just work at a job. They want to try their hand at maybe some innovation. I actually not only did contract programming, but I wrote a lot of books too. I've written 24 technical books on, say, C++ programming, ASP.NET. That's another kind of contract work you can do that's peripherally associated with programming, but not exclusively programming. Another question is contract programming the best kept secret? Actually, in a lot of ways it is. I have really found that some contracts are very lucrative and fairly easy to do. When I lived in North Carolina, I had a lot of contacts. And every so often, I just luck into a really great contract where the work was easy, the pay was good, and they just kind of let me do my thing. As long as I would deliver on time and with the quality they wanted, they happily paid me. But all these questions are variable. They depend. So now let's take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of contract programming. Let's start with the good. So whether you have collaborators or you work alone, you are your own boss. That means you can set your hours, you can get up at 4 in the morning and work, you can work until 3 in the morning. It just depends on whether or not you're a night owl or a morning person. You can decide what equipment to buy, how to pay for it, how to allocate your resources to get your job done. In a lot of ways, it's really nice that you can make your own decisions. You can also go to work in shorts and bare feet, which I had a 3-year period once in Reusable, North Carolina, and my business partner was pretty fresh out of college. He was about 25 years old, and so we were in a little house, and he lived in the back part of it, and essentially we were bohemians. We didn't worry about anything. We always were in bare feet. We did all of our business deals over the phone or online or whatever. So you can observe whatever style you want as far as when you're working. You can take long lunches and play volleyball and tennis. So during that 3-year period, the YMCA was about a block and a half away. Twice a week we'd go down and play volleyball during lunchtime. The other 3 days I would play tennis at the community college with a friend. So you can do that. You do have to make up the time. It's not like the long lunches are free. You got to get the work done or you're not going to get paid. You can also work on projects that interest you. For instance, I did a couple of chess games during that time, and it was really nice because I was always interested in AI. I was always interested in how chess engines worked. So I spent time teaching myself the technology and perfecting it. So we ended up doing a lot of video games during that time. I wrote a couple of books during that 3-year period. It was just really nice to be able to not get stuck on these BS projects that really didn't mean much to me. It's really fun to brainstorm ideas with your business associates, and at that time with my business partner, and he actually had a couple of other people staying with him. So we'd get together and we'd brainstorm ideas. So it was really fun. I think that's the best part of software engineering anyway, is the brainstorming part. In general, it pays better than most jobs. In fact, it really paid pretty well. So a lot of it's on 1099, which is more difficult. You have to pay like what's known as self-employment tax. But contract programming usually pays fairly well. You're forced to continually learn new skills. Well, here at UCF, I learn new skills all the time. I'm always having to add things to my bag of tricks. You know, in the past, I've had to learn like MERN and Angular and React and so forth, TensorFlow. So that's not unlike a lot of other software engineering jobs. But I think it's even more critical when you're a contract programmer. There are some downsides. There is some bad. For me, one of the bad parts was doing things such as keeping track of finances, paying occupational licenses, possibly having fire inspections. The fire inspectors would come and inspect every 6 months, and every 6 months they'd find something different, even though they passed you on that item 6 months before. So there's a lot of related stuff you have to do that has nothing to do with software engineering. The work rarely just comes to you. Most of the time, you have to go out and actively seek it. Occasionally, someone will contact you and say, hey, we need this done. Especially when you have established clients who are used to working with you and want to keep working with you. If you get stuck on a problem, there might not be anyone who can help you. Like in a lot of jobs, there's always an expert on this, an expert on that. Maybe there's always, say, a database expert you can go to and ask questions. Or maybe there's someone who's an expert in graphics you can go ask questions. When you're contract programming, you're basically stuck. And at the time I was doing this full time, there wasn't a really strong internet. So it wasn't like today where you can just go to Stack Overflow. Today you actually can get a lot of help online, such as resources like Stack Overflow. But it's not the same as having someone you can walk down the hallway to and ask a question. Sometimes you'll get behind on your deadlines. When that happens, there's no more volleyball or tennis while you're behind on your deadlines. Don't forget, your first responsibility is to make a living and to satisfy your clients. During slow times, you often take work that you really don't want to do sometimes. That never happened to me very often, but occasionally. So there are companies that specialize in certification, preparation. Maybe they give like these study guides and say a bank of test questions. Well, I did some of those as a way to sort of bridge the gap. They're really boring to do, and I never liked them, but it paid fairly well. So that's what I mean by sometimes you have to bridge the gap with stuff that may not be your first choice to do. You don't get paid sick or vacation days. You just basically get paid, and it's up to you to determine what your sick and vacation days are. So here's the ugly. Your income alternates between feast and famine. You better be good at budgeting. So for 3 months, we'd be really rich and we'd be high-fiving each other on how much money we'd make. The next 3 months, we'd be like, oh, we're not doing too well. Another really big problem is that vendors don't always pay on time. The best you can get is net 30. I've done a lot of really large projects where I got paid net 60. That means after you turn in the work and you turn in your invoice, they're going to pay you 60 days later. And that can be a very big problem if you don't have the financial reserves. So here again, you have to be really good at budgeting so you can smooth out that cycle. Banks don't always value self-employment the same as a, quote, real job. So that means when you go to get car loans, house mortgages, it's a lot more difficult to get those. Normally you have to show 2 years worth of tax returns, and hopefully both of those last 2 years have been fairly good. But even then, when you provide your tax returns and maybe had fairly good incomes, it's still difficult if you're self-employed. There's one really important decision you'll have to make if you decide to do any kind of contract programming, and that's whether or not you're full-time or part-time. You have to decide whether or not you're going to be in some sort of a team or you're going to be some sort of a solo lone wolf. Now, the choice of your team is crucial if you want success. I've had both. I've been on really good teams and I've been on really bad teams. And I can tell you right now, your team makes all the difference. Every project depends on your working relationships. And you're in Senior Design 1 now, so I'm sure you can really appreciate that. Good work ethic is key. Getting to work on time, getting stuff done on time, doing a quality job, not just doing a copy and paste from the internet to get your job done. Let me summarize some really good advice for you. Avoid drunks and drug users. Avoid drama kings, queens. Extend your BS meter as far as you can. Remember that talk is cheap. I have had people tell me they're graduates of MIT and blah, 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 and I've done this and that and the other, and they had done none of the above. Don't be adverse to checking people out who are representing themselves with these really illustrative careers. Beware the backstabber. This is fairly common. So once I had a proposal into Microsoft Books to do a book on ASP.NET, and I had a friend, he had a proposal into Microsoft Books to do a C# book, and for whatever reason he got in really cozy with them, and he stabbed me in the back, and all of a sudden they decided, without telling me why, that they were going to go with someone else. Beware the person who is intertwined with everybody. So I have this guy I used to work with, and he had this contact and that contact, but the problem with having all these contacts and he's trying to work 12 deals at the same time, you never do anything very well, you never do anything right. So he's had a very poor track record of results over the years just because he couldn't focus on one or two things. So how do you find contract work? Well, the very best way to do it is lean on your old contacts. Hopefully you've had good relationships with people you've worked with in the past, or you've done really good contract work for people in the past. This is your best bet if you're going to get any kind of work. Write for websites, magazines, newspapers, book publishers, anything you can do to get your name high in search results. I actually spent a lot of time on my personal website doing a blog, which its only purpose was to get me higher in the search results, so when people were searching, they might be able to find me. Make a list of companies who might have work. You can't just call and hope you get the right person. You have to try to find someone inside who knows the person who hires contractors. You can't just take the dartboard approach and throw a dart and hit a person, and you got to actually have some sort of inside information. Ask to stop by and introduce yourself. A lot of people will not answer emails. A lot of people do not want to take phone calls. But if you stop by, it's actually a lot easier to say, hey, how you doing? And it really breaks the ice a lot better. Keep all of your relationships warm, even if it seems remote. So people you've worked with, say 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, try to find some reason to contact them, whether it's an email with some sort of interesting information, or maybe just asking them a simple question, but somehow keep that relationship warm. Go to meetups, go to user group meetings. Anything you can do to be face-to-face with people is a really good idea. I did find this out the hard way. You need to perform due diligence on the companies you may work for. You have to vet the organization offering the work. Try to find other contractors or previous employees who've worked for them. Ask them questions. Did they pay on time? Were they specific on their requirements? Things like that. Find full-time employees and ask them questions. Of course, you can't ask them direct questions because they'll get suspicious, but ask them these indirect questions and try to paint the best picture you can of the company. Ask about potential unreasonable demands, working conditions, flexibility, prompt payment, and frequency of rehiring. Check with resources such as Better Business Bureau or the Chamber of Commerce. So sometimes, no matter how enticing the contract, you just have to say no. The most tantalizing project is a bad idea if you don't get paid. And I know this sounds hard to believe, but there are people out there and companies out there who will have you do the work and not pay you. Also, you do not want to work for an organization who might encounter legal jeopardy. If they do, then any kind of intellectual property or any kind of money that they owe you might be sort of evaporated into the wind. You don't want to waste any time in court because some company you worked for is in court. Not that you'd be a defendant, but you might have to be a witness. A lot of contract work will give you change orders that you might not get paid for, or that might reduce the contract's value. I did a contract for the Department of Homeland Security about 3 or 4 years ago, and I probably got 3 change orders per week. And even though I was billing on a per-hour basis, it was still really frustrating to have to go back and implement these change orders. There are going to be times for contracts when you don't have the skill set and can't gain the skills in a timely manner. Now, I know that you guys are in senior design and you're picking up skill sets so you can do your projects. That's different. You have months to do that. But a lot of times a contract is due in 4 weeks, and there's no way you're going to learn something like TensorFlow in 4 weeks. An organization who treated you unfairly in the past will probably repeat the same behavior. So the old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Don't fall into the trap that oh, well, this contract is different. We're going to really pay you well. We're going to really treat you good this time. Chances are they won't. There is such a thing as free advertising. I worked at Compute Magazine. I was on the staff for 3 years, and we had a famous saying that the best things are free. So you will need to get as much positive exposure as possible. And I had already sort of alluded to this when we talked about blogs and meetups and so forth. Write a blog about technology that is related to your specialty. The search engines will pick it up. It might get you a better rating, and you might be able to get a lot more work as a result. Post at least once in as many forums as you can, and try to link back to your own website. Speak as often as you can. Make guest appearances at community college courses, Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, Chamber of Commerce, and any other venue you can find. Write articles for websites, magazines, and book publishers. When I was in North Carolina, there were a group of closely related newspapers, and so I would write a weekly column, and all the papers would publish the article. This was great because I definitely got a lot more work as a result. Consider creating a semi-professional website covering software engineering topics. I know you can't compete with things such as Stack Overflow, but let's say you had a subject that they weren't mentioning that was sort of obscure. Well, if someone searched for it and you had it and these other sites didn't have it, you might get up in the rankings. Let's talk about negotiating rates. The very first thing you need to do is some research. Know the current rate in your area. What are other people charging? Now, a lot of contractors are going to be very reluctant to share that information with you, so you're going to have to work extra hard to just kind of make friends and in a very non-threatening way try to find out what they're charging. Definitely do not come in too cheap. I've done that before, and you don't look good. They almost don't appreciate it if you come in too cheap. They're suspicious of you, and they think, well, maybe you don't know what you're doing or whatever. So above all, do not come in too cheap. Startup companies try to get your rate lowered by giving you stock options. This happens to me all the time when I work for startup companies. But what you want to do is start at twice your rate, then take the options and cut your rate in half. And that's what I normally do now if I work for a startup company and they want to cut my rate by giving me stock or stock options. The rate I'm asking is always twice what I would accept. Get a retainer, especially if you have to hire subcontractors. And in the times that I have not asked for a retainer and had to hire subcontractors, I was out of pocket quite a bit of money. Had they defaulted or not paid me or paid me really late, it would have been a severe hardship on me. Sometimes you want to offer a block of time for a reduced rate. A lot of times they won't see this as you being cheap. They'll see it as you giving added value. This slide talks about one of my weaknesses. You need to spend time to balance your accounts. It does take time to look after the finances. You will need to gather information for accountants and spend time with them. There's no way around this unless you have maybe a partner who does this for you. But factor this into your time budget. So make sure when you're scheduling your time, say for this week and next week, make sure that if you have to take care of details such as this, that you have that budgeted into your schedule. Accountants do not do the day-to-day bookkeeping for you. They might file your taxes and keep your books and so forth, but on a day-to-day chart of accounts, you're going to have to do that yourself. So I would definitely recommend using tools such as QuickBooks. QuickBooks isn't free, but in the end it's going to save you a lot of your own time. So another really big piece of advice is do not host your own servers. You know, back in the day when I first started this stuff out, we would just buy servers and get UPS power systems, and we'd manage them ourselves in our own facilities. Well, make sure you're not doing that, even for small things. I know a lot of my student groups have used servers out of their basement for their projects, and it's just a really bad idea overall. So it's far cheaper and more effective to use hosting services such as GoDaddy, Heroku, DigitalOcean, so forth. It's even cheaper than that. You can get a server on, say, AWS or Azure. What's really cheap is to go ahead and use the serverless functions. And those are very cost-effective ways to provide the functionality you might need. The exception to this is a development server that is on site. Like I mentioned before in some of my other teachings, that I always have a development server on site. It's a really inexpensive $200 to $300 machine that I use as a development server. So that's the only exception, but that's not public facing. Communications. Don't mix your personal communications with business communications. I've learned this the hard way over time. Try to separate it out. Have two phones or two phone numbers for people to contact you. One personal phone number and one business phone number. As far as emails, make sure you have separation there from your emails. Try to use whatever domain that your company is on or your website is on. Consider a landline for your location. So I know this is a bad word for most people, but if you're in business, definitely get business cards and don't cheap out on them. They're not very expensive anyway, and nice business cards really give a lasting impression. Now let's talk about resources. This includes GitHub, domain registrations, server hosting fees, and so forth. Do not, unless this is just temporarily, push a contract project to your GitHub account. Instead, push to the account of the contracting group. So here again, on the last slide, I talked about separation of concerns. You want to make sure that you're not using your GitHub account for this contract work. You want to make sure that when you do a contract for people, you ask them for their GitHub, you ask them for a repository that you can push to. Do not, unless only temporarily, use your own server resources for hosting the work in process. The exception to this is your development server. And what I mean by this is that once you get an application developed on a server, a public-facing server, and it's for a client, then if they want it on their server, you have to do this migration process, which is prone to errors. So I'm going to suggest that if you're working for them, you say, I need server space, and make sure it's in their name because then they're getting the bills. You want to make sure everything's really clean as far as that goes. Do not register a domain yourself for a client. Ask them to register it and assist them in pointing it to the correct location. I've done this before accidentally or without thinking really, registering domains for people, and like 5 years later they're asking you for help or asking you what to do about renewing the domain or something. So it's a really bad idea. Do not use third-party services for a contract that are in your name. So the name of the game here is make sure that everything is in your client's name. Their server, their GitHub, their domain registrar, and so forth. Anything, and this includes like maybe a service such as SendMail or Twilio or any of those services. Make sure it's all in their name. This is one of the downsides to being a contractor. You don't have a lot of individual protection. Anyone can sue you, regardless of whether they're right or wrong. And legal costs can chew up your yearly profits pretty quickly, even for an unfounded case that doesn't last for very long. So you should consider getting insurance that covers liability and legal fees. And this might only cost you $300 or $400 per year. It's really not that expensive. Also consider taking out key man insurance on the technical principles of the company. Clients will sometimes pay for this. This happens to me actually fairly often when I'm working on some sort of a project and I'm integral to the success of the project, and sometimes they'll pay for key man insurance on me for the duration of the project, just to make sure that for whatever reason I get hit by a bus. Remember that bus insurance story I've told so many times. If something happens to me, then they have enough money that they can recover. Contracting does not mean that you get an automatic paycheck. You need to always be concerned about getting paid. So I always send out invoices really as soon as I possibly can. As soon as I've completed the work, I'll send out an invoice. Follow up with a phone call to make sure someone got the invoice. Make sure you get a name of the person you talked to. Most invoices get paid net 30. I've had some jobs though where I got paid net 60, and this really does make it more difficult. Make sure you know this before you start working. So it's always worth the effort to ask them what their payment terms are. Different from that, royalties are normally paid 45 days after a quarter ends. So the first quarter of the year is January, February, March, and if you made any royalties in January, well, the quarter ends after March, and then you have April and mid-May. So for the first quarter, it would be mid-May before you get paid. So for a lot of my books and my software, I've gotten paid. So I always treat it like this. I just don't count on the money. And then when the quarterly royalties come in, I'm pleasantly surprised, and I smile a lot. There are going to be cases when you don't get paid. This is the most difficult part of consulting. I'm still owed $12,000 from a company in Sacramento. This goes way back. Talk to the accounts payable person and see if there is some mistake. That's your first course of action. They might be cash poor. See if they can let you know when to expect payment. Sometimes you can negotiate a lesser payment that you can get more quickly. This happens more often than you think. It is hard to sue people if you don't have cash reserves. It is hard to sue people who are far away. If there is no money with which to pay, no attorney will be able to get your money. But if you suspect it's just a stall tactic, a letter from an attorney can work. I used to do contract work for this one guy. He would never pay until you half sued him. So after the first few times I worked for him, I mean, he paid really well and all, and when I got the money, it was really good. But the effort I had to go to get paid just soured the whole thing, and I stopped working for him. This is almost the best part about contract programming, besides the volleyball and tennis. Developing your own ideas is fun. Developing your own idea can make you the next Words with Friends or Flappy Bird. This allure is strong for many. I know it is for me. But this is the most difficult thing to achieve. It takes a lot of hard work, and more surprising, it takes a lot of luck. It wasn't like Flappy Bird was the best game or the best app that was uploaded. It was just a stroke of luck that the right reviewer found it and decided they liked it. It is possible to get investors for your ideas, but definitely do not ever take money from friends and family. So eventually you're going to have to pay taxes, if you make money, that is, and hopefully you will make money. You need to pay taxes every quarter. If you don't, you will find yourself getting behind. Also, there's a penalty if you don't pay your taxes every quarter. You'll pay double the Social Security rate. It's called self-employment tax. And a lot of people wonder why contractors get paid so much per hour. It's these types of expenses, the self-employment tax and the need to file every quarter, which means you have to pay accountants. So these are the reasons that you're charging more per hour than a person who just goes to a job. With a good accountant, you can reduce your tax liability. My accountant really saves me thousands and thousands of dollars every year because she knows how to structure my taxes and which deductions I can take and how to take them most effectively. Sometimes the tax advantages can offset the extra Social Security tax. Let's talk about office space. You don't need a public front. In fact, I recommend against it. I've had offices that were accessible by the public, and as it turned out, I would get interrupted more often than anything useful. Visit clients instead of having them visit you. Use your basement if you can. Make sure kids and pets will leave you alone. If you need to rent space, get the cheapest possible. Make sure that if you rent space that it is safe, because if deadlines run late into the night, you don't want to put yourself in jeopardy. Another good piece of advice I'd like to give you is that you should be developing reusable pieces. Make sure that when you're developing software for clients, you're saving the libraries or the classes that you've built, maybe any kind of development tools, test tools. So make sure that you're developing libraries that you can reuse for other clients. Be careful about the contract you sign. You don't want to be in violation of custom work that you did for your client that you plan to reuse. So just make sure that anything you're doing is not like any kind of intellectual property that they can come back on you and sue you. Basically what you're doing is you're creating libraries that are reusable and pretty generic. Ready-to-use pieces can help you get your future projects across the finish line much faster. And faster is what clients are looking for. Your website tells your story. Your website should effectively tell your story. Make sure it is a good one. Display samples of your work. Tell them what your approach to contract work is. Keep it simple. Consider having someone else develop it. So I know most of you can do web development. Most of you are probably pretty good at it. But this is one of those things where you should consider letting someone else do it for you. Make sure it's up to standards and works on mobile devices, maybe using CSS like Bootstrap, or maybe development frameworks such as React or Angular. Search engines always respond to changes, so make sure the content changes every so often. Include metadata for sure. You need to rely on social media. You need LinkedIn at the very least. Anytime I've hired people in the past, I do two things. The first thing I do is I go to LinkedIn and read about them. The second thing I do is a generic Google search. So make sure you've got a really good LinkedIn profile and it's really professional. Try to get some recommendations if you can, endorsements. Once you've done that, then connect with everyone possible. On Facebook, you don't accept friends that you don't really know or you don't want to be associated with. But on LinkedIn, I accept connections with everybody. So I do a search and connect with related professionals even if I don't know them. A personal Facebook doesn't help and may even hurt. So consider deleting your personal Facebook. If you do have a Facebook presence, make sure it's professional in nature. Twitter is optional but not that useful for technical contacts. So there will be some technology that you don't know for a job that you want to bid on. And you got to be really careful about this. Sometimes I will bid on a job even if I don't necessarily know the technology that well. I always make sure that it's something I feel like I can learn pretty quickly. In these cases, spend at least time learning the buzzwords. So if you're talking to someone on the phone and they're trying to drill down on you, that you at least know what to say. Learn the tools, the compilers that you might use, the IDEs, the third-party tools, the libraries, and so forth. Just make sure that you're up to speed and you're ready to go. One of the most important things your clients are going to want you to do is to deliver on time. See, they'll have dependencies on what you're doing, and if you deliver on time, they're just going to love you. If you want repeat business, you need to deliver on time. That includes all the documentation and testing, I know that we go over that a lot in processes. You should be able to deliver, say, any kind of Gantt chart or class diagrams. You need to be able to deliver the results of your unit testing, unit and integration testing. Even though software is notoriously late, when someone is paying for it, they are not very sympathetic. So don't be that person who says, well, software is always late, so it's okay. It's not, actually. If you're going to be late, make sure you at least give them fair warning so they can adjust their plans. Because as I said, they have dependencies based on the work that you're supposed to be delivering. Remember that the company you are working for could very well experience financial losses if you are late. Sometimes a company uses your services for projects that are in some sort of trauma and are looking for you to rescue it. So these are really dangerous projects to go on board with. I've done a few of them, but basically you inherit really horrible code that's incomplete, full of bugs. It's just, I've done it before, but what I do up front is I tell them, look, this is a rescue mission. You guys are going to have to be patient with me. I'll do the best I can. And I kind of rely on my reputation to convince them that I'll do the best I can. So in processes, I talk a lot about unit and integration testing. If you're doing contract work, you need to have some sort of a solid testing plan. You need to make sure that you've laid it out on paper and you're able to carry it out. Don't count on the client to produce this because they usually don't know that much. Or maybe they do, maybe they'll tell you what they want you to do, but usually it's up to you to develop an effective testing plan. Give them the results in a printed report when you deliver the product. Include unit, integration, and end-to-end tests. Now, end-to-end tests are not always that practical. Sometimes you're only writing a piece of the puzzle, and you can't really do end-to-end testing. But at least do unit and integration testing. Ask the client if they already have a license to end-to-end testing software if you're going to have to do it. They might actually have some sort of a license for software that you can use. The end-to-end software is very labor intensive, so if you can automate that in any way, it's going to be a real big plus. If not, consider purchasing a package that you can use for all of your contract jobs. So there are times when you can get on board the wrong platform, a platform that is going nowhere. And I fell for this a couple of times with the Windows Store. I'm sure you don't remember this, but at one time Windows owned the mobile phone market. Now we think of Android and iPhone. Some of us distantly remember BlackBerry. But before that, Microsoft had like Windows CE and a few other products. But they definitely lost their way. And then came the Windows Phone we know today. Actually, when they came out with a Windows Phone, it was pretty nice, but nobody trusted Microsoft for mobile technology. Microsoft went through 3 phases of convincing developers to create an app for the Windows Store. I fell for it twice. Anyone who believed them regretted it, especially believing it more than once, which I'm included in. Remember Google's social media attempt? They also tried to lure developers into creating apps for the platform. Fortunately, I missed that experience, and I'm glad to this day.